God wants the person that's meant to be hear this to hear it for what it's worth. So, I found this before I came in today, right in the back door. Well, Corey did. I stole it from him. But it's a kiss from God. So I think my story is one of learning how to be loved by Him. And so it was very appropriate. So I figured I'd share that with you guys. But so I did not grow up in a Christian home either. I grew up with loving parents that did the best they could with what they knew. Both came from abused homes. And so I still have great parents. They're still married, they're wonderful, and they love me the best they know how. But we know the Father's love is perfect, right? So I started off in a loving home, just like any other kid, middle class. I remember it wasn't until about junior high that I realized I was different, and I didn't know what that meant. I was just a very bubbly, loving, I'll hug your neck kind of person, and I began to see that no one liked that. I was weird, I was different, girls didn't like me, and so I became an outcast. All the while this is going on, my dad traveled for work, and so he was never home. And so through that, I developed an orphan spirit, even though he loved me. I felt like because he was gone, that I must have done something wrong for him not to want to be home all the time. Even though he was providing and he was doing what he had to do for our family, there was a part of me that just felt lost and left. And so I grew up with just a mom. And so my mom was great and she loved me fiercely, but she had her own issues from her family and her mother and things that she dealt with. And so that came down on me. And so, anyway, so I would go to school and I get made fun of and I get picked on. And I was bullied a lot. And so I began to find my worth in self-mutilation. I started cutting myself in 7th grade. Because it's what I could control. It's what I could do that was for me. And so I did that until the end of 8th grade, and my parents moved me because they felt that was the best thing for me. They didn't know I had this problem. They just found out in the recent years. But I was moved to Dallas, and from Mount Vernon to Dallas. And so that came with a whole whirlwind of changes. I was exposed to a lot, and so I was accepted though. All the girls liked me. I was different. I was from a small town, and I got in an abusive relationship because I was looking for love. I wanted to be loved by someone, especially a man, because my dad wasn't there. And so as I went through my high school years, I just finally found that cutting wasn't the thing because I wanted boys to like the way I looked. And so that came with giving myself away because that was the only way I felt loved. And so I found my worth in how a man saw me for my beauty on the outside. And so I just had self-hate because at that point I hated myself because I'd always been told the right thing to do was not to give yourself away. So I hated who I was, and I was still clinging to that hope of love from a male figure. So fast forward, I went to college. I was always the good kid. I never did anything wrong until I went to college. I had a free ride to drink and do drugs and do whatever I wanted to do. So that's what I did. I never really settled with drugs. That wasn't for me. It made me too loopy, but I loved to drink. And so I started drinking when I was 19 years old, and it went downhill until I was about 24. And so I would say I was an alcoholic when I quit drinking. Through that time, I went through multiple relationships, was engaged to a man that abused me physically and emotionally. And I just remember in that time, like, I would talk to God and I would ask him, like, you know, why am I here, and do you love me, and if you just do this one thing for me, I promise I'll do better, and I'll straighten up, and I won't do that again, and I'll get out of this relationship. And it was always an empty promise. It was always just to get what I wanted for the moment, for him to answer a prayer or to get me out of a mess I was in. And so I had gone to church some with my mom and them, but it never stuck. And so I was saved at 13 and did experience what I thought was the Holy Spirit So I know in those moments of all of that mess that he was definitely speaking to me, but I didn't listen. And so through all that, I grew up in a household that love was something that strings were attached to. So I love you, but if you do this, then you're cut off. Or I love you, but if you do this, I'm done with you. So I heard that a lot as a kid. And my dad strived for me to be perfect. He wanted straight A's. If I came home with a 98, it should have been a 99. If I worked out and took care of myself, well, you could run a little bit longer, you could try a little harder. It was never enough. And so as I remember in those moments of, striving for love in the wrong place and hating myself, I was also trying to be perfect for my dad, for my mom, for the person I was with, for myself. And it wasn't until a little church in Pagoda, Texas. It was May 27th, 2012. We got married in 13. It's 2012. I had gone to South Carolina to live, and just a vicious cycle of drinking, driving. I've wrecked multiple cars. Thank the Lord I never went to jail. Just lots of just stupid stuff. So anyways, I came home for the weekend to see my family, and I remember I was sitting in the pew of this little church, and the pastor was talking about love, and he was talking about what it means to love somebody, the real love of the Father. When you love the person that you're with, that you're married to, or your children, or things like that. And I was like, I've never experienced that kind of love. And so it dawned on me that I had never loved anyone in my life that way, and it broke my heart. And so I just remember that I was shaking like a leaf, and I got up when they did the altar call, and I had no idea what I was doing. But I just know that I walked down, I was sweating, I was shaking, and I got on my hands and knees, and I was like, God, I don't know what this looks like, but I want it. And so,
yeah, amen.
So at that moment, I gave it all up. Drinking, sexual immorality, all of it. And I was like, God, I want you. Like I said, I don't know what it looks like. So I said, what do you want from me? And he said, I want you to come home. And at the moment, I thought it was a physical home, and it was, because I did move back home that next week, but it was the home of him. It was his home. It was to be a daughter. It was to be loved. And I'm still learning what that looks like. He's teaching me more every day. And so Corey and I we dated and I got married, and through that transition, I learned that Corey couldn't be my God, and that I had to love myself for who I was, and I had to be loved in return. It wasn't until in the recent couple years that I actually knew what it felt like to be loved by the Lord. And so that's been almost 7 or 8 years, and I'm just now starting to learn the full depth of what that means. And so we got married, and through the process of being a newlywed and having children, God's really done a huge work in healing my heart to love my parents for what they are and who they are, and praying for them. He's taught me how to love Corey with a selfless love, and my children with a selfless love. And he's taught me that it's okay, wherever I'm at, whatever I look like, to be vulnerable. And I don't have to be perfect. We don't have to be perfect. No matter what we do, regardless of how much we do, all the good works, he still loves us. And so he's taught me that and teaching me that on a day-to-day basis. But I just want to encourage you guys that we're not orphans. And regardless of, what you're going through, he still loves you and he's still there. I can look back on all the times that I was in the midst of something and he showed up and I didn't even know it. And now I look at the times that I need him and he shows up and I do know it. And it's such a beautiful transition to see the difference and to see him for who he is. And another thing too is another thing that God is really teaching me now, and has taught me in the past, but it's resonating, is obedience. I think that's so precious to me, because when God asks you to do something and you do it, He's going to honor it. He's going to come forward. So just a short snippet about when Corey and I moved home from Greenville. I was pregnant with Harper. We came home on an act of obedience. We sold our house, our brand new house we just bought 2 months before that. Kind of big God. We sold my house. And so we moved home, and it was such a dark time just because we were just going through a lot, and God was really removing a lot of things out of both of our hearts. And I just remember that I was going somewhere with this. I just don't know where I was going. Obedience, thank you. Yes, so that was an act of obedience. So I went to work, and Corey stayed home with our kids, or with Harper, and recently he was like, I want you to quit your job. And I was like, nope, not doing that. So that was about 7 months before I put in my notes, or 8 months before I put in my notes. Found I was pregnant with Ezra. And I really struggled with the Lord about it because I didn't want to do it because the fear of not having enough, the fear of not being able to provide, pay our bills, to buy the things that we want, things like that. And so God really dealt with me a lot. And at the end of the day, I didn't realize it. I do now, but Corey's like, well, he's trying to remove something out of your heart. And I'm like, what is he removing out of my heart? Like, I don't know what else is there. And it was fear. It was fear of, it's an orphan spirit, a fear of not having enough. You know, we live from abundance, we don't live from poverty. And so he was really trying to transition my mind to, like, even though, like, in the natural, we wouldn't have whatever, but we live from the heavenly places. We live from abundance. And so through that time of he was wrestling with God about whether or not to do it, he was removing, like, the want and the need to have the things of the world. He was removing fear and not having enough, and really just allowing us to trust, me specifically, to trust in him for all things, especially as our provider. Because like I said, when we're obedient, he's good to come through. He's going to honor our obedience in all things. And so I quit, and I came home, and I will say that God has been good. He has honored that obedience every step of the way. Even when there's been days I'm like, how are we going to do this? Or there's worry creeps in, or what have you. He's been good to honor that obedience. And Christine came, you showed this sermon to us probably a few months ago, but she talked about the grace for the race. And I'll just encourage you in this too, is if we're obedient, we follow what God has for us, there's grace for the race. There's grace for what he's called us to do and the things he wants us to do. And so for me, like, the transition of learning this whole nother side of God that I didn't know existed, and how to be who he needs me to be in the season, it's been the grace for the race. Because I'll be honest, I had a meltdown today. I cried for like 30 minutes because I was like, I'm not doing this right, God. Harper's having a hard time. I'm having a hard time. But as long as we're obedient, he's going to put us where he needs us. And he's gonna love on us through that. So that's all I got.